This is February 2nd, the Dev Talk Show. And it certainly is. I mean, is this Groundhog Day? I don't know. I mean,
I
it
was just
is,
gonna say it's Groundhog Day.
but Groundhog Day stopped having a meaning to the day, I think, for some folks. I guess if you saw the movie, right? Then it's about the day repeating. So I think it's interesting that it's actually Groundhog Day, but it doesn't feel like I'm trapped in a time loop.
Oh, it does to me. Yeah, I'm feeling a little um, feeling like I'm trapped in an endless loop these days. But I got to tell you, I love the movie Groundhog Day,
Yeah, me too.
and I have an old shirt. I should have. I sometimes I try to wear it. I have a shirt from the movie Groundhog Day, like an actual from the movie Groundhog Day shirt. But it's so worn because I mean, what year did that movie come out? You think? Take a
90.
guess. I'm going to Google it. What time?
Well, my
What day do
guess
you
is
think
going
it
to
came out?
be. Well, I can tell you, I know it for sure. I say for sure, famous last words, right? 92 or 93. And the reason I say that is because I was working at a movie theater at the time. And I know what year I did
Got it.
that.
Well, that
So,
was easy for you. You only worked there for 2 years, so you were able to narrow
yeah,
it down. 93,
93. Yeah.
Groundhog Day.
Yeah. And I remember that
Um,
Friday it just did okay. And then the word of mouth was unbelievable. And people showed up and, like, sold out Saturday and Sunday. That was a
it's
different
a
time.
good movie.
Yeah, that was a different time
Yeah,
when
well,
movies
that's when,
sold
yeah,
out.
right. The movies used to, I was working for Columbia Pictures at that time, I think. And that was one of our movie. That was a Columbia Pictures movie, and I think I was still working for Columbia Pictures in '93. It's hard for me to remember. I'd have to actually go back and look. Oh my gosh, who knows? But um, what a great movie! I'm not a big fan of. I don't want to be like getting negative here. I'm not a huge fan of Andy McDowell.
Oh,
I've never
really?
been like totally on her team. I mean, she's okay, but Bill Murray, man, Chris Elliott. I mean, what's that guy? Ned, Ned Ryerson or what's it,
Yeah,
the guy who plays that guy?
who was that, right? Because
Yeah, what is that guy's name?
what an
Well, let's
iconic
see. I'm sure I
character.
can.
Um,
Yeah, hang on. I'm looking at this page
Dark
here.
Elder's
It's
checking in with us here.
casting.
Happy Wednesday to everybody.
What's that?
Dark Elder checking in with
Oh, hey,
a
how are
greeting.
you?
So awesome.
Look at this.
Stephen
He's got the name
Tobolowsky. Look at
Stephen
that.
Tobolowsky, as I think who he's talking about is Ned.
Yeah. Yeah.
Uh, so obviously I don't know if he just knew that or he's a fan apparently. Uh, Dark Elder. Stephen Tobolowsky. I'm gonna Google this guy. This guy. So yeah, so I feel a little bit of I feel the Groundhog Day thing. Yeah, there he is. Yeah, you know what he was in? I watched uh Silicon Valley.
Oh, okay.
Did you watch that?
I haven't seen it.
It's a
Heard it's very good. It's worth watching. Yeah.
a great geek show in
Yeah.
particular, right? Because they have like they talk about like stand-up media. They talk about like geek stuff in there, right? Um, there's a one joke where they actually have like a board where they're putting post-it notes up there like it's the Scrum board,
Sure.
and
Right.
there's you see that kind of thing happening. Anyway, he plays like a guy who becomes he's like an executive in the industry at the time or something like that. But he's good in that part. But I recommend that show. I thought it was really entertaining, really funny, not suitable for work kind of humor,
Yeah.
um, but really good stuff. What's funny is when I Googled Stephen Tobolowsky, the page that comes up is actually the top of the page says the Groundhog Day cast, and he's
Yeah.
like Google knows that the reason I'm looking for him today
Right.
is because of Groundhog Day. Like that's pretty cool, isn't it?
Yeah. Definitely. Definitely. So as you can see, we don't have Rich. It's I'm Chris Gomez with Andy Schwam. Um, Rich just couldn't be with us tonight, and you know that's okay. I think that's why there's three of us. Um, and we were.
Statue. Hey, statue's here.
Oh, awesome, awesome.
Statue's commenting on my lovely manliness here. Um, I guess I got tired of not growing hair in all the right places, so I'm going south here, just letting it all grow out. But I don't know. It's getting itchy. I don't know. It's starting to get a little like when I wear a coat, it like bangs into the beard. You know, it's like
Yeah,
I don't know. We'll see. We'll see how it goes. How's Statue? How you doing? I hope everything's well with you.
yeah,
Um, so yeah, you were saying, yeah, that's why there's three of us though, right? Because Rich
yeah.
isn't here,
Right.
and it makes it easy for us to rotate. Now, the downside, well, there's a lot of downsides of Rich not being here. Um, he's the only one of the three of us who knows anything, right? So if you're here tonight, you're left with me and Chris,
Yep.
and you know, we're like the B team. No,
Yeah.
I'm
Well,
kidding.
and then the other
Chris,
part was that
I'm the B team.
no,
What's
it's
that?
not. The other bummer is Andy was gonna guide us mostly um for Azure container apps. And
Rich
well,
was.
yeah, sorry, I kept saying you,
He
but
said
I
Andy
meant to
was.
say you're like, man, what? You're like Andy's gonna do it. It was Rich was,
I was.
and he's not here. Um,
I
so
think Restream chat's not working, by the way. So if you're on YouTube, you might not be seeing the chat syncing between YouTube and Twitch. So if you're on YouTube and you hear us saying, "Oh, look, statues here," you know, we're getting comments on either of the platforms. So we'll have to keep an eye on YouTube in case there's any comments over there. But so sorry, Chris. I just noticed. I realized when I realized Restream chat wasn't working. I just wanted to mention that, but I did interrupt you a bit there. You were talking.
well, Rich Ross is over on YouTube chat, and he says that he hears us, which is good
He's on the
because
YouTube chat.
it was a little touch and go that I had the audio right. So,
Ah,
anyways, so yeah, we were going to talk about Azure Container Apps, which you know I know a little bit about in terms of how they are different from other Azure services, because I think it's easy to confuse them with other things like, well, why would you use you already have Azure Container Instances, you already have Azure Kubernetes Service, you already have Azure Web Apps, but I think you know the idea there is how web apps basically made it so you concentrate on your application, you don't worry about the deployment. The same could be said for container apps in terms of whether you want like to deploy a little service or something, or so it'll be interesting to catch up on that. I think we'll have to update our calendar and perhaps set that up for next week. But
yeah, that's a bummer.
yeah,
But you know, that's what happens, right? We got a show. The show must go on. A live show, and
it's not fair to totally blame Rich either because I was supposed to work on it too, and
no. Let's blame Rich.
and
I
I
mean,
ended
he's
up
not here. He's in the. He might be in the chat, and we can. So this is even better because we can say things about him, and you know, if he's on like YouTube listening, then we can just like bash the guy. You know, I'll tell you. Tonight's topic is like the top 10 things we don't like about Rich, right? I mean, that's what we should do.
that's the show.
And then you know, but payback is a you know what, right? So
Yeah, right.
I know I'll be missing a show one of these days, and I'm sure there's an easy top 10 list on me as well. So maybe we shouldn't do that. We do like Rich.
Yeah. So I do have an idea because there was a short video series that we wanted to record. We actually have one on the YouTube channel. There's a grand total of one, and it's called the Dev Talk Show Breakpoint. The idea being that you set a breakpoint maybe at lunch or something, and you can watch a 10-minute video. And one of the topics that we were going to do on Breakpoint was, what was your first programming language? And the idea is not, it doesn't matter what it was for. It doesn't matter if you got paid. I mean, you can use that if you want. I was curious just to wonder what were the roots of all these things. And for me, I I have a couple answers, but in general, for someone my age, it's often going to. I think a lot of people are going to say basic, and that was it for me. There were all kinds of flavors of basic when I was a kid, and so my first PC in the home was an IBM PC, so I had a flavor of basic called Basic A or Basica, depending on who you ask. And then at schools, we had Apple IIe's and Apple IIc's. Remember those things? Like they got in all the schools, and they were telling all the parents, like, you better get an Apple at home because they're going to be everywhere. And we learned. I had a computers elective in my 6th grade class where we were learning basic 10 print, quote, hello Chris, 20 go to 10. So I used that as, hey, that's my first programming language, and I was just curious if you and Rich had a different response, but I'd love to hear your response because I think we might clip it into a short video another time. No pressure though.
Well, first off, let's talk about the chat because Dark Elder says QBasic, and what's interesting. I mean, it's different for people depending on their, your age, really, right? Like what was popular at the time, and I don't know, so maybe this sort of gives away people's age. I don't know. Statue says Blitz Basic, a game programming language that some book suggested. That's kind of interesting. Right into game programming, right? Like how cool is that? Skipped over, whatever. But I love the fact that you said basic. I think you said basic, and then Dark Elder says QBasic, and Statue says Blitz Basic. So was everything like something basic at a certain point,
QBasic was a little after. I'm not trying to say that it wasn't basic, it was, but the basic that I remember was line numbers. That the standard, the convention was that you separated everything by 10. That was just the convention that I was
remember
taught.
that was always the case, wasn't it?
Yeah, and the reason is because that way you could insert lines, right? Because you literally would type into the computer, you would type 10 print and your command, and then you'd hit enter, and you're basically telling it, okay, I have declared what line 10 is. And when you said run, it would start at whatever your lowest number was and start going down. But I find that not everybody, just because people even who might be the same age, they might have jumped into the computer game, so to speak, at different times. And for me, I was a kid, I was 8, 9, 10 years old. And I actually even knew the different flavors because Atari Basic was generally the same, but Atari, there was the TRS-80, the Tandy, the VIC-20, and the funny thing about it is the way you cleared the screen on all of them was slightly different. So in IBM's Basic, it was CLS, and boy, I don't think I'm going to be sharp enough to remember Commodore and VIC-20 because it was print char string, but I can't remember the character code. TRS-80, it was call clear. And so it's interesting that I still remember a lot of that stuff. But I'm really curious what your answer is. And actually, I want to grab something. Oh, except I don't think it's up here. Oh, what a bummer.
So I guess, here's the thing. Like when you say first programming language, right? Like I did take a course, like I'm older than you, right? But I did take a course in some school. I think it might have been high school or something that had like a or maybe it was even younger than that. It was some sort of Apple basic kind of thing, but that was like, again, like you said, like I remember, like, you write the 10, you do this, and then you'd say go to, you get to 50 and you go to 10. It would just like loop itself. Like I remember that, but I wouldn't call that my programming language, meaning that like I never really did anything significant with it, right?
The reason I'm looking is I'm hoping to find something in my room, so I'm sorry that I'm being a little distracting, but I do want to hear what you say, Andy.
Yeah, I think of actually the first real programming I did was Access, like VBScript, I think is what it was. Is that VBScript in yeah. Is that
So
what it was called?
Access you could write, you wrote
Oh,
SQL queries, right?
VBA. VBA is what it was
Yeah, I
called.
think it was VBA. That's right. And so
Yeah,
basically you could create like a little application and have a button, and then you could put code behind the button, and it was
yep,
VBA, right? Yeah.
definitely. It
Yeah.
was pretty rich. I mean, you could do a lot of stuff with it. Like I built like a real application for work in
Hmm.
that. Like that was a profession, somewhat professional. I mean, I was a hack, but that was like the first real programming language. I mean, again, like you said, I did some of that stuff in school when I was young. And I'm older than you, but yet I didn't like. I mean, some kids really were digging into programmers, uh, into programming in those days. But I wasn't. I didn't have any kind of like. It was interesting, but I wasn't really into it, by any
Yeah.
stretch.
Yeah.
Um, you
So
know,
like the
um,
reason I do count basic is that I did I did write a lot of code in it. I don't know that I ever wrote anything substantial, but what I was hoping to find was some old books that I have. Um, I used to buy books that had basic programs in them, and you would type them in from the book. And I had this series called Micro Adventure. They were these novels. They weren't very long, and they were novels. And you were supposed to be like a super spy. And what would happen was you're reading the novel, and then something happens, and it's like, oh, you're gonna have to break into this room, and you'll have to figure out the code. And so then the next few pages was a basic program, and you typed it into your computer, and it might be like a little game, and maybe the game was like a code breaker game, and you could play it as long as you wanted.
oh, that's
And then when
cool.
you were done with that, you could go back to reading the story. And I actually have the
That's
novels
awesome.
here somewhere. Um,
Would we have some kind of emulator that we could type those in with? That'd be kind of neat.
so I went looking for that the other day. I said, hey, and yes, there is a DOS basic emulator. I was hoping that it would be all in a web browser, but it looks like you download it. But I would certainly give that a go with the micro adventure stuff, just because I wish I could find some of my older books. I think a lot of them got thrown away. I used to have books like 30 programs for the IBM PC, or one was called 25 computer games for the Olympics. And so basically they were different programs that were games, but they were Olympic themed, and all with ASCII art, all of it, because that's the age it was all ASCII art. So when I got a little older, I
And some of
learned,
that ASCII art, gotta say, for people who haven't seen
yeah,
ASCII art, some of that stuff was pretty impressive. Like it's amazing. It just goes to show ASCII art is an example of something that just goes to show that if you give a creative person something, they
anything, yeah,
will they will
yeah,
figure it out. Like they will do something. I mean,
right,
ASCII art. But I remember seeing some robust things, and people would figure out ways to make it animate,
hmm,
like scroll and do things. And like, wow,
yeah,
I'm not that
yeah.
creative. That's cool.
I wish I still had this, but when I was learning Pascal, I had Turbo Pascal, and I wrote what I would consider my first completed game, and it was an implementation of the game show Press Your Luck. So I don't
No
know how many
whammies.
people are old
That's your
enough to
favorite
remember Press
thing.
Your Luck, but I was a Press Your Luck addict. I loved that show. And so what I
Yeah, no
implemented
whammies.
was I implemented a scene all in ASCII with 3 podiums for each of the contestants and their dollar amount, and then there were 6 squares at the top, because I didn't implement the whole game board, but there were 6 squares, and the squares would randomly change their values to dollar amounts or big bucks or win a spin, or
Big bucks,
remember
big
those
money, big
remember
money,
yeah,
big money, big money.
remember those little ASCII symbol faces. There was the one of the,
Oh,
and we could go find it on the ASCII chart now, but there's a face. I think it's ASCII 1. I think it's character 1 for all I know. And those were the whammies. So
I
the
didn't know. I don't
squares,
remember them being ASCII art. I do remember the whammies,
right? Well,
but
no, they weren't ASCII art. I'm saying in my game, because my
oh,
game
okay.
was all ASCII. So the squares would say 200 or 400, and then it would just be the little face, the ASCII face. And then what I did is I was randomly moving, because you know how the press your luck board worked is the board would change in values, but also the square that was the active square would be dancing around. And so I
Yeah.
did that. And then you hit the space bar and it stopped. And if it was a whammy, then I had the
Was it one of
speaker
those kind of
go
things?
"Rrr, rrr," like I played with the speaker sounds for days until I could get it to make that sound. And then I had different whammy animations. And one of them was the little face jumped on your money, and then I set it to 0.
Yes, that I remember. Yeah.
Yeah, but I had a little ASCII face jumping on your money, and he would set it to 0. I spent a couple weekends on this, and these were my first all-nighters. And I wish I still had that game.
Do you have it on a floppy somewhere, or?
I don't. Not even the old floppies that were sitting at my parents' house decades later. I did not have.
Isn't that a
Pressure
shame?
Luck. Yeah.
That's a shame.
Yeah. But
Because just to look at it would be.
oh gosh, the code was terrible. And when I was getting near the end, here I am. I guess I'm probably about 15, 14 years old. And I'm getting near the end of implementing it. And I'm just like, at this point, I recognize that mistakes were made, and that some of the code has gotten so repetitive and awful. And I'm recognizing that, although I certainly didn't have a whole lot of maturity in that. And I just want it done. I just want the game done. Like, so I'm just whatever it takes to finish this thing.
Oh yeah, that's when the hacking really begins. You're just like, whatever, make it work.
So access was first.
Cool,
that was it, right? You said you'd say that was your first. Yeah, nothing really changed. I totally agree. Nothing. That's exactly
slammed by Dark Elder there. Yeah,
nothing
really changed.
It's not wrong.
Yeah,
but you're saying if you had to pick first.
By the way, Loka's here. Hello, Loka. I see a smiley face or a little thing in there. So nice to see Loka's here. Got some chat going on. So some people worked on other basic things, but I'm curious to know. We could change this topic slightly and say, what was your first professional programming language, or not even just that, like how many programming languages have you worked professionally on, or something like that kind of thing.
That's an interesting question. What was the first language that somebody actually handed money to me to do something with?
Right.
I actually know the answer, but go ahead.
Well, mine's the same, because remember I did this thing at work. It was this VB. I must have done something before this VBA thing. Otherwise, I wouldn't have even had the idea that I could do it. I must have had some other little programming thing, or maybe it just started when I was building like some kind of macro in VB and just figured out I could take it further in VBA. But no, I got paid. Technically, I got paid to do that. I was doing it at work. So, that story's not. Mine doesn't get too exciting because nothing really changed. Like it's the same answer. And I have a good follow-up question. I'm going to write it down. So why don't you tell us what was your first paid?
Wow. Well, this actually is an interesting. I mean, this isn't going to make any sense to absolutely anybody. So, but that's okay, right? But I'm thinking about it now. And I actually found a book on Amazon. So the story about my first job is interesting. I was working at that movie theater, and a friend of mine said, "Hey, you write, like, you know how to write code, right?" Like, he didn't know what question to ask me. And I said, I mean, I don't know. Like, I had a computer science curriculum in high school. I knew Pascal. I'd done a little bit of C in high school, and then I knew BASIC. And he said, my dad is starting a company, and I wonder if you could help him. So I talked to his dad, and I talked to him about the BASIC I knew, and he respected it. He was like, yeah, well, I'm using this environment called Revelation, which was part programming, part database. And he said, I think if you know BASIC for the PC, you could pick this up, and I could use some help. And that was my first part-time job. And that was the springboard to my career. Um, so it was this Revelation Basic helping him curate this program that he wrote. This is going to sound great. He had wrote his own scripting language that was very Logo like. Do you remember Logo, moving the turtle around? So Logo was this early programming language that was often taught to kids, where they had a turtle and you would face the turtle a direction and then make it walk 10 yards, and it would leave a trail, and you could teach kids to draw squares and stuff. Well, he had implemented a very Logo like language where you basically said, move here, draw this line, move here, write this text. And his company idea was, at the time, companies would buy stacks and stacks of pre-printed forms to print your bills. They would be dot matrix lined, and big forklifts.
Yeah, no, I know what you're talking.
Yeah.
Oh my God, yeah.
Big forklifts would load them in. They'd line them up, right? And if there was a jam, it screwed up everything. You had to find the jam and then tell the programmers restart the job from this bill and all that. So his idea was, well, laser printers are coming into their own. What if you just loaded up blank paper into laser printers, and you still had your programmers from the mainframe, that's how long ago this was, send the data for the bills, but just before the bill is printed, his little code uses the printer's own language, because LaserJets had PCL5 and PostScript and stuff like that, and we'll draw the form for you. We'll just draw it right on the paper, and then you fill it in with your traditional programming style. And I know I'm saying this very quickly, and now you throw away you don't have to order those big pallets of paper anymore. And the business was successful. I mean, it was successful.
Well, so this is laser print. So wait, this is when you were getting started.
Yeah.
So
93.
But laser printers already existed. So,
but they weren't quite. So back then, a laser printer to be used in an office for commercial printing was not quite there yet. It wasn't until the LaserJet 5 SI, which printed 20 pages a minute. So you can see that this is what I did, right? That's when it became viable, because remember, these impact printers.
That was exciting. 20 pages a minute was exciting.
Well, impact printers could print. It was ridiculous. If you stuck the way it was spooling paper, you could not put your hand next to it. It would just tear your hand right off, right? Because think about, impact printers are spooling. So the idea was, well, wait a second. Laser printers are too slow. 4 pages a minute, 5 pages a minute. That's never going to work. Once they got to 20, you had a business idea where you'd say to the company, you want to get rid of those impact printers? Staff your office with laser printers, and then at night when you need to do these print jobs, no, I know one printer doing 20 pages a minute isn't good enough, so we're going to send it to all the printers overnight. And then you just have your courier come around and stack them all up. I know that sounds primitive, but it turned out for a lot of businesses, they said, wait a second, we can get rid of that clunky impact printer that we have to repair all the time, and we need a forklift to load. And then programmers have to be awakened at 2 a.m. to restart a job. If there's a failure in a laser print job, you clear the jam, and what does the laser printer do? It reprints the same page. The programmers never have to know. So it was actually pretty cool. And he built this whole programming environment in this Revelation Basic, and I helped him with it for a little bit. And that would be the answer. That was the first time. Look, I don't know the first thing about this anymore, but that was it. That's what got me started. It was pretty crazy.
That's cool.
Like, what is this Revelation?
That is pretty crazy
stuff, right?
What's amazing is you're pretty young.
Yeah.
How old were you?
I would have been 19.
Yeah. So what's cool is that, like, there was a time, and maybe this is still the case in certain circumstances, depending on the people involved, right? But like, everything was so new. So it wasn't like, someone would look down on like a 19-year-old and say, well, no, I want to talk to this person who's 40. They got 20 years of experience. Nobody had 20 years of experience. If you had a year of experience, generally speaking, at certain points in time, if you had any experience, you were just as good as anybody else that had experience, like.
That was right? That was beginning to happen in the 90s, especially as the web hit, because no one knew the web. Where what I did find I was competing with, and when I say competing, I use the term loosely. is I didn't necessarily have the respect of my peers because they all said like, well, you don't know mainframes, you don't know Unix. Like, come on, you got to know all that stuff. You have to have a CS degree. You had to do all those things. We were on the cusp. We were on the cusp of the self-taught programmer era, but it hadn't quite arrived in 1993, but it was coming. It was entering. It was happening. And by the time you got to the web, which was happening at the same time, then no one knew how to build a site and use Flash and I know I'm bringing up old school stuff
Flash.
here, and use Macromedia and make, remember in GIF maps, remember those, where if you wanted some kind of menu with where the user clicked here, it went to this link, and here it went to this link. The web used to support GIF maps, right? Where you put a GIF up and then you mapped that clicking here goes here, clicking here. It doesn't support it anymore, but the browsers used to support that.
Oh, God.
No one knew how to do this stuff. So the era of the self-taught programmer was beginning. But I did face a lot of, when we talked to customers, I could always tell that there was skepticism. Who is this kid? He doesn't know garbage about this mainframe I work on, like nothing. And I'm like, yeah, you're right. I don't know. I'm here to help you. But you know what? The kind of things that I had to do without knowing a programming language like Fortran or RPG, without knowing them, it would be a programmer calling in to ask us, I can't figure out how to get your form printed. Can you help me? And I'm looking at his code, trying to figure out how Fortran worked as we're looking at it together in person, because there's no screen sharing. So I might have
wait, that's so funny you said that, because as you're saying this, I'm thinking, I'm envisioning this. You're on the phone with the guy.
Yep.
And you're sharing his screen.
Nope.
Like, that's just,
nope.
Of course, what came to mind, because I forgot that we didn't have those things.
I got a fax.
We take these things for granted.
I got a fax, a 3 or 4 page fax with his code, and then I'd be looking at it, talking to him, saying, well, this code here that says print this, is this how you print escape characters? And they'd be like, yeah. And I said, okay, you need to print char 27. That's what you have to do. I don't know how to do it, but that's what you got to do. And then eventually I did start to know those little things. Believe me, I could not write a Fortran program, but I could tell a Fortran programmer, oh, here's how you print an escape character, because, well, I looked at this fax. It was a very strange time.
Oh my God, yeah. That's I mean, printing things was pretty normal. I used to print out code, circle it, draw on it, like try to think about it. Mm-hmm.
Sometimes
printing code,
sometimes the support would go like this. I'm gonna have to send you over the program, and then it would come by FedEx 8 a.m. the next morning in a document folder, a printout, and I don't know what that costs, $50 or something to overnight.
Probably, yeah.
Now, as our business matured, we did start to get more and more programmers that would send floppies, and then eventually they would FTP stuff to us. Like, the internet this is 1993 through 98. This is the beginning. This was the beginning of the internet. Crazy time there, right?
That's funny. You're bringing back memories of printing and sending. God.
It was a cool little business that he started, and I will forever be grateful to him for my career, because he lets a 19-year-old work part-time for him, still went to college. The job helped me pay for a significant amount of college, so that I was able to come out of there without a lot of debt, which I know is a problem for our young people today, right?
So you worked there a while then. This wasn't just like a couple months.
Yeah, I worked there 5 years.
Oh, wow.
And then when I graduated from college, I actually was planning to go to law school. And I said to myself, well, I can write this resume and I can say I have 5 years of experience. Let me see what happens. And I did. And then I got my second job. And I think I've even said on this show before that I truly believe once you get your second job, you're very secure now. and I'm not trying to say you're not a developer if you haven't found your first job yet, or if you're working at your first job, please don't misunderstand me. But once you get your second, I personally believe that from that point on, an interviewer or a manager is gonna, I mean, two people have hired you, right? Like,
well, I think I get your point,
right.
that there's a certain, I don't know if you've used the right words, but I think I know what you're saying.
I'm
It's
not
like,
trying to belittle
you've
anybody.
got a certain level of street cred.
Yeah.
Right. That, like you said, two other people hired you, so how bad could you be, kind of thing. And sometimes the first job, and again, I'm not knocking the first job. Some people never left their first job. Some people are dying to get their first job.
Yep, absolutely.
And some people might just be starting their first job.
Yep.
But when a resume comes around and you see that person had that one job, sometimes you think, okay, they're beginning. But when they've had two, when you see two on there, you're like, that is like a good what's the word? Like, that's a thing. That's like, wow, you've achieved something. You've got your second job. That is. No, I mean, I guess if you stay at the first job long enough,
sure, I agree.
Negates that too. There's plenty of ways to negate that, but
yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, that's interesting.
Yeah. So yeah, that was the first job. But now, while I was there, I didn't just do R basic. I actually got back into C while I was there. I learned C++ while I was there. I fought learning C. Learning C++ was very difficult for me. So when you think about how old I am, I start in basic, I go to Pascal, I go to C. So we used to call it top-down programming. We're not talking about the object-oriented paradigm has not hit enterprise programming yet. But C++ was beginning to make its inroads. And I realized I needed to learn it. And I struggled. I literally had the book C++ for Dummies. I had that book. Great book, by the way. And as I read it, when I finally got to the chapter, classes. I think it was chapter 7. First there was operator overloading, and there was all the feature. I mean, not function overloading, and all the features of C++ that were really just adding to C. We were not yet at what C++ was adding to C, classes, right? I read that chapter at least 4 times a week for, I think, a year, because it just wouldn't click. It just would not.
You didn't have that aha moment. I remember, especially in my earlier programming days, I don't remember like the exact instances, but I remember that feeling of the aha moment where all of a sudden you're like, wait, that's it. That's it, right? And that's such a great moment. Like, you read that chapter over and over again, and at a certain point,
right,
you got it, right?
Yeah, it didn't turn out to be from that book, which is nothing against the book. What really finally got it for me was when I was thrown into the fire to write an app with MFC. Remember MFC? MFC was WinForms before it was WinForms. It was Visual C++ Win GUI programming. And if you know WinForms, then you know that buttons are classes and text boxes are classes. Well, MFC, all those things were classes. And that's when it clicked for me, because now I was actually using objects and reading their values and wiring up events. And it was like, oh. But just reading a book and seeing that bank account example over and over and over was not working. Because that was a common C++ example is, you have an account, and here's a checking account.
There's always
and here's
a bank account. A checking account inherits from a bank account.
Yeah. Yep.
And I still use that example because when we talk about like solid principles, or some of these things, when we talk about like good programming principles in general, you start to learn that it's not it's because that's what they teach you. A bank account is a checking account is a bank account,
right?
But then you start to say, well, wait, is a checking account substitutable for it's sort of like that different way of thinking, because we were kind of taught it like maybe that is a example wasn't the best teaching tool, but it's what we used at the time. And bank account was always it. So here's a question for you, because you know a lot about these languages and you were a part of these things. C, C++, right? C. Where did the C come from? Was there an A language and a B language? And then, no, I always wonder, like,
Yeah.
were they writing a few and then C was the one that, like, oh, that one actually, we got something. Do you
Yeah.
know if there's any?
I'm gonna get some of this history wrong, but there was a B, and I believe the story is Kernighan and Ritchie, who are the creators of C, worked at Bell Labs, which was one of they were on the forefront of Bell Labs was one of the places that was on the forefront of inventing the future of like programming. I don't know really how else to put it. And there was a language there called B, from what I understand. Now, I'm not going to tell you, I don't know how well it's not like C++ and C sharp, where C sharp was definitely inspired by the C family of languages, and C++ was a C with classes, right? I won't go that far, but my understanding is that Kernighan and Ritchie named it C. I don't think it necessarily was because it was born of B, but I don't know the answer to that. But I do think that there was a B. And what C did, and the reason why it gained so much traction, is it was the first. A lot of programming books back then used to call it they used to differentiate between low-level programming and high-level programming. And they would say assembly was low level and basic is high level. And I used to remember books back then, they would call C a mid-level programming language because it had the characteristics of a high-level language in that you programmed in things that looked more like words. You said if and for and function. Well, not function, but you said void and you didn't say function, but instruct and stuff like that. But if you wanted to drop down to the hardware, the C language, like, that's built in. So, in fact, you can write an assembler block in C, which I've never done, but you can. And so that's, I think, why it became so popular, because here was a language now where, quite frankly, C became the foundational language, I honestly believe, for the world we live in today, still. Like, at its core, just about everything we work with was at some base layer implemented in C. That includes Windows, that includes Linux, fundamentals of I wouldn't be shocked at all to learn like the fundamentals of the Java VM, C and C++. I don't know that, but that would be my thinking. So,
you know, I checked on, according to Wikipedia, it does say that C is the successor to the programming language B, developed at Bell Labs. So you knew your history. I just threw that topic out, and you were able to, you knew it. Now, I always wonder, like, with the name C++.
Yep. So that was independent.
Like you said something like, what's that?
That was developed independently by, and I never can say.
Yeah, but I wonder why the name like plus plus.
Yeah. So originally,
like, was there a C plus before?
No. So originally Strustrup, and I feel terrible because I can never say his name correctly, a brilliant gentleman who you should watch him speak on YouTube these days. He originally called it C with classes. But one of the, when I talk about the new features, so C++, besides adding classes to C, there were some quality of life enhancements. In C, the only way to declare a comment was with slash asterisk, then your comment, then asterisk slash. That didn't matter. You had to open and close your comment. Well, in C++, if you did 2 slashes, this is starting to sound familiar, you get a 1-line comment and you don't have to close it. That was a quality of life improvement, right? Another quality of life improvement in C++.
It's amazing that like someone had to like start that.
Yeah, right. We take it for granted now, but C++,
totally take
right?
it for granted. Someone had to think of that.
Another quality of life improvement in C++ was function overloading. In other words, if you had 2 functions but with different parameter lists, that was okay. In C, you couldn't do that. You had to name it print 1 and print 2. but in C++ you could.
Right.
Quality of life improvement, right? Another quality of life improvement was to iterate on a value. You no longer had to say I equals I plus 1. You could say I plus plus. That was in the C++
wow.
language. And somehow, I don't know if it was Mr. Strustrup himself or someone else said, well, let's just call the thing C++ because it's an iteration on C.
Well, think about that. Yeah, think about this. If they added the feature, you didn't have to say C equals C plus 1. They just said you could write I equals I plus 1. You could just say I plus plus.
Yeah.
Right?
I
that's
think,
probably where the name...
I'm beginning to wonder if I'm wrong about that. And C may have had that. C may have had that plus plus shorthand. Maybe it did. And so, you know what? I'm beginning to question myself because this is a while ago. C may actually have that plus plus shorthand. So that actually makes more sense, is that you say like, oh, well, we're iterating on C, so let's use C++. Because come to think of it, I think C did have that plus plus and minus minus shorthand. I think it did. I think that it
does say, I'm looking at the Wikipedia, and it does say C++, plus being the increment operator in C.
Yeah, okay.
So
the
operator existed in C,
yeah.
And he named it C++ because he was incrementing.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's a
I almost
interesting name.
So it's funny when you lived it, right? Like I'm reciting the history orally because I remember these things happening. But we didn't have an internet then. So you know what's interesting about that? Not having the internet and not having YouTube and not having audio is we guessed back then how to say things. When I worked in the 90s on SQL Server, there used to be arguments over whether you called it SQL Server or SQL Server. And who was right? Because what video could you watch of someone saying it? So who was right? Well, IBM people tended to say they were right. And actually, to this day, IBM will tell you that SQL is how you say it in IBM's world, and SQL is how you say it in Microsoft's world. But who was... the debate over GIF and GIF? The GIF, which is how I say it, was invented in the 80s for CompuServe. There was no audio chat. How do you know how to say it unless the inventor of the GIF says in his RFC that it's pronounced GIF with a soft G, which he did say, but nobody likes to hear that. So they said that you're wrong. It has to be GIF. And I'm like, well, were you there at CompuServe? So that's why you hear me say it. But I think Dark Elder is actually correct. I think he has the best guidance for how you know how to pronounce something. I tell people it's pronounced the same way like the boss pronounces it.
I guess that's a pretty good way to go.
Yeah.
I still have the whole thing of Azure and Azure.
Yeah, right.
And I will say that I thought for a long time that it's hands down Azure.
Yes.
Because I hear Scott Goo, I hear people saying Azure, right?
Yep.
But internationally, it's pronounced like I've heard other authorities.
Yes.
Every now and then I'll hear somebody that I think of as an authority. I'm like, oh, they're calling it Azure. Like, it's interesting. Maybe it's not a one-way, one way to pronounce it. But yeah.
I recall when Azure was introduced to the world that someone, and I don't remember who it was, and it might have been Steve Ballmer, did tell the audience how to pronounce it. And Microsoft, in my opinion, I do not know if they would cop to this today. I believe that they did have an official pronunciation. And I believe they told everybody, this is how you say it. And then I know that that is no longer the case because I have seen officially in videos that Microsoft produces saying you say it how you want. They even did a video recently of how do you say Azure, and they had a bunch of people say it. And I think somebody finally realized, like, there's no reason to be hard-headed about this. Who cares?
Who cares?
Yeah.
Let people say it the way they want to say it. You want to use it? We want people to use it.
Yeah.
We don't care how they say it, right?
Yeah, exactly.
So I was thinking, you were saying all this stuff about programming languages, older programming language. I was thinking, what's the most, I don't know if I have the right wording for this. What's the most surprising language that you liked? Meaning that like you used it because you needed to use it for a certain task, and you found out, you know what? This is this is pretty good. Like, do you have a
Wow.
situation where like something you used is just sort of exceeded expectations?
Wow, that is hard because, when you think about like what a language is, um, like I learned PostScript, which was a language for printers, and I didn't really enjoy it that much, but I also learned PCL5, which was quite
I didn't
quite
even know PCL5 until you said it before. I didn't know there was a language.
yeah.
I have a printer, and I think I remember seeing in the drivers, it's like this PCL5
Yeah.
driver. I didn't even know what that means. I just thought that was some kind of printing thing.
Yeah, PCL5, when I call it a language, it was a lot like a like Logo. You basically had sent the printer commands like move to this pixel, now write this text, change to this font, you know. Um but it was very serial, whereas you look at like an HTML, and HTML isn't quite like in HTML you don't have to say, "Okay, now do this, now switch your font, now switch." You can say, here's an element, and then the style will tell you what to do. Um, I actually think a contender there is HTML because it was so unlike anything else that I'd ever used, but yet with just simple text in Notepad, you can create this graphical looking web page. Now they didn't have to be graphics at first, like you had the monochrome browser like Lynx, but Mozilla's Netscape was what really introduced most people to the web. And that's when people said like, "Oh, this is the web." Okay. And you remember there was text and columns and images and clicking on links. And it was always fascinating to me that all that stuff came from angle brackets, greater than less than signs, and knowing that to create a tag this way and that way and linking that way. And you had something that felt like a document you could bounce around in. And we immediately wanted to turn it into an application platform because that's the first thing we tried to do, right? But it obviously had a long way to go. But that was probably the most surprising thing about how useful it was for very little effort.
So, right, with very little, you could do a lot.
Yeah.
It's true. It's still around today.
You know, you might remember Jeff Atwood. He was one of the people that started Stack Overflow, and he used to have a pretty famous blog called Coding Horror, which maybe he still writes to. And his
I
contention was,
remember.
yeah, his contention was the reason the web won is it was the simplest thing that could possibly work. He didn't say that meant it was the best thing. He just said it was the simplest thing that could possibly work, and that's why it succeeded. Because everybody else who tried to make platforms like it engineered it, and so it was complicated enough that people said like, that looks too hard. Or if you engineered it and you did a really good job, like let's say HyperCard, then you lock it behind your walled garden and you say, yeah, you want to use HyperCard, you got to get on our platform. And so that's a good way to keep something from growing, right?
It must have kept it from growing because I never heard of HyperCard. I don't know what it is. So the walled garden must have worked.
Mac users would be very sad because HyperCard was a system that they had on the Mac that was like, it was kind of like the web before the web, but it was trapped on your Mac, you know?
Gotcha.
Yeah. Yeah. Crazy times, man. I mean, no, I think about the languages I learned. I mean, yeah. So I learned C++, and that's when I got my introduction to Visual. At the time, there wasn't a Visual Studio yet, so I Visual C++, and wrote Windows services, which was very difficult. Um, because you really had to work very hard at memory management, resource management, make sure you weren't leaking handles or memory because you wanted this thing to run 24/7. And man, what a pain. What a pain that was. That's the reason we have Java and .NET for with garbage collection, is because that problem was so hard for programmers. It was so easy to write programs that leaked resources. So simple. Or to write buffer overruns, which was a security exploit at the time. I mean, it still is, but it was enemy number one. So yeah, that's like a trip back because things have really changed. It's programming is still a discipline. You still have to learn a lot, and there's still a lot to know. But it's funny how some of the problems that I used to really fight through, I don't want to say they're solved because that's not true, but I don't think about them the same way. But yeah. Yeah. So after Access, what was after Access, if you remember?
Java.
Okay. Did you ever write applets?
Java. Yeah, some applets and JSP.
Okay. Yep.
Like both of those things.
Yep.
Definitely Java. Yeah, Java and JSP. And then within like a year, let me think about this for a minute. I feel like within a year of learning Java, I was teaching Java.
All right.
Yeah, the company I feel like it was, when I say teaching, who was I? It was I do remember being up like the first thing, like the first kind of thing I remember like talking about like this stuff we were just talking about, the inheritance thing, and like, okay, so let's create a bank account and let's inherit from that, and you have a checking account. And I was teaching Java and object-oriented programming, essentially, right? That's what we're really teaching. But I did teach some parts. It was internal corporate training, and I probably didn't teach the entire curriculum, but I got to teach a couple of the segments, the modules, if you want to call them that, within the thing. And it's funny because I don't think about that very often. It just sort of popped into my head that like I was doing that.
Yeah.
Maybe that's what gave me the idea to start doing presentations. But I was like, yeah, I could teach this. I know it.
Right.
I mean, I was no expert. I was probably doing it a year. But it worked out. And yeah, JSP.
Yep.
JSP was, it's like even hard to remember what it looks like sometimes. You know, I mean, it was messy. It was like spaghetti code. A lot of that spaghetti code stuff happening in there. And I mean, definitely applications were not organized very well. I was cool, right? Because I made private methods. I took some of the stuff out and made it into private methods and called those, so like that was the early attempt at like getting the application really organized, and but probably didn't go much further than that. you know, Bad naming conventions, bad file structures, just everything dumped into one place. That kind of stuff makes me crazy now. But I did it all.
Yeah. Well, I
Made
mean,
all the mistakes.
in the early days of the web, right? Like everyone was desperate to figure out how to make it be more than just the static HTML. And so how did you do that? Well, when a request came back to the web server, maybe you could have some code that ran and figured out what to spit out, and that eventually led to things like classic ASP, and we didn't call it classic ASP then. ASP, JSP, Cold Fusion, obviously PHP rose out of that. CGI, where you wrote this stuff in C. Yeah, I mean, man, those were dark times.
Yeah, there was a lot of stuff that like it just didn't work that well. You know, it's
Right.
the frameworks and stuff were just rough. They were not perfected. You know, you just had to try to make them work. But then you learned a lot from those situations. You know, you learned a lot.
Yep.
Anyway, what do you think?
Yeah, I mean that's interesting to think back. I hadn't thought back on what languages I used at the beginning. But certainly you could say kind of my way into the industry was it was it's hard to say. Like I say, was it unusual? I don't know. Um, I think that I think there was resistance to the self-taught developer then, but then again, there can be resistance to that now. So it's not like things have changed. But you know, certainly we hear good stories of people who maybe say every once in a while I'll see a tweet or something about, hey, I started learning to code a year ago and I'm starting my first job on Monday, and I love to see stuff like that. I think that's great.
Oh yeah, that's good stuff. All right, so what do you think about time here?
Yeah, yeah, unfortunately I think what we'll do is we will reschedule a look at Azure Container Apps for next week. And we do have some other topics that we were trying to pin down, um, and keep that stuff on the meetup. So I would say anybody watching, make sure that obviously on Twitter, we try to keep people updated. And then there is the meetup site, right? And probably the easiest way to find us on Meetup is not so much with a URL, but just to go to Meetup and search for the Dev Talk Show. Just because the URL is kind of strange, right? Like you have to put dashes in. So
Yeah, it's kind of weird. Oh well. Oh
but
well. So we'll be back next week. Try to do Azure Container Apps and see what else we come up with after that. But I don't know. I'm getting kind of tired tonight.
all right. Well, hey Andy, thanks for coming on. I know that we had to to change course a little bit. That's okay. We'll look forward. Hopefully, we have Rich back next week, and we'll be ready to do that topic. And so that'll be, let's see, it's February 2nd. So February 9th at 8:30 U.S. Eastern Time. We do appreciate everybody that joined us today, whether you joined us in the chat or not. Definitely appreciate you spending time with us. It's always cool to hear from you. Glad that you're here, and hope it was fun, even though a lot of it was we just let's see, how did this work again? But Dark Elder, thanks for that. Enjoy the rest of your week as well. So
Yeah, look,
and then we
Loca's
got
joining in also.
we got this Road a Game
There
and
must be a
Logo,
long delay at where Loca is. Maybe there's a long delay.
HyperCard in
Road
School,
game logo. Look at that.
VBA and
VBA,
Action
Visual
Script.
Basic, Action Script.
Yeah.
Yeah, similar stuff, right? A lot of
Yep.
similar stories.
Yep. Cool.
That's cool.
That's great.
Yeah,
Thanks
thanks
for
to
sharing
Loca
that.
for the chat, statues in the chat, Dark Elder, anybody else that's just popping in and saying stuff. We appreciate it.
One thing, and let me see, how do I find out about this? Because I saw the coolest thing. Let me see if this is right. Is this it? Yeah. So we are going to have our friend Statue back on. And the reason why is, let me see if this works if I get my screen back up here, which I don't think I'm sharing it in Skype. Sorry about that. I
didn't know you were sharing. Have you shared anything tonight? I'm sorry.
I have, but it's not that big a deal.
Oh.
So here it is. You should be able to see it through Skype now.
Something, yeah.
So I saw a tweet, and I'm totally putting him on the spot here. One of our viewers in chat I saw a tweet that he is working on Darklang, and said, hey, if you want to learn more about it, you want to pair up and learn how to use this or how to contribute, just let me know. I saw that in one of his tweets, which, let's see if I can find that real quick. He is at...
I don't know what dark lang is.
Well, see, that's just it. I don't either, but that's okay. Here it is right here. From yesterday, join us chatting about Darklang, likely interesting to F# folks as the migration to an F# backend is wrapping up and Dark's language is similar. And I just said, hey, look, he's a friend of the show, good friend of the Philly.net community, totally. And he's working on something neat. I wonder what this is about. So we will have to have him back on. And I wonder, now that I've been talking about him, if his ears have been burning in the chat there. But
yeah, or, who knows if he's even still here? But yeah, that's cool. No, that's good. Let's mark that down. That's a sucker him in for another. I mean, invite him to be another guest, and
yeah.
You know, that's cool. Yeah, that'd be great. Great idea.
Yep.
All right.
All right. So hey, that'll do it. We'll see you next week, February 9th. 2022. At least today we had Deuces Wild 2222, and
ooh, I didn't even notice that.
Yeah,
that's cool.
Yeah, but that's it. That's it today. Deuces Wild today. Get them while they last. Tomorrow be the 3rd. So we'll see you next week on the 9th. Keep track of us on Twitter. Check us out on Meetup. Keep the conversation going on Twitter. We'd love to hear from you. You've got our Twitter handles right there. The Dev Talk Show is for the show. For my co-host, Andy Schwam, thank you for the chat tonight. Thank you for everybody in chat. I'm Chris Gomez, and we will see you. Watch, this is going to work, right? We'll see you next time on the Dev Talk Show.